Friday, December 16. The great controversy is nearing its end, we read in Maranatha, page 220. Every report of calamity by sea or land is a testimony to the fact that the end of all things is at hand. Wars and rumours of wars declare it. Is there a Christian whose pulse does not beat with quickened action as he anticipates the great events opening before us? The Lord is coming. We hear the footsteps of an approaching God. End of quote. And then from an article written by Ellen White in the Signs of the Times in October 20, 1887, titled The Light of the World. Live the life of faith day by day. Do not become anxious and distressed about the time of trouble, and thus have a time of trouble beforehand. Do not keep thinking, I am afraid I shall not stand in the great testing day. You are to live for the present, for this day only. Tomorrow is not yours. Today you are to maintain the victory over self. Today you are to live a life of prayer. Today you are to fight the good fight of faith. Today you are to believe that God blesses you, and as you gain the victory over darkness and unbelief, you will meet the requirements of the Master and will become a blessing to those around you. End of quote. And from the same author, in the book called Heaven, page 165 and 166, the Lord is soon to come, and we must be prepared to meet him in peace. Let us be determined to do all in our power to impart light to those around us. We are not to be sad, but cheerful, and we are to keep the Lord Jesus ever before us. We must be ready and waiting for his appearing. Oh, how glorious it will be to see him and to be welcomed as his redeemed ones. Long have we waited, but our faith is not to become weak. If we can but see the King in his beauty, we shall be forever and forever blessed. I feel as if I must cry aloud, homeward bound. We are nearing the time when Christ will come with power and great glory to take his ransomed ones to their eternal home. End of quote. And that brings us to our 3 discussion questions for this week. 1. How can the notion of the person, body, soul and spirit as an indivisible whole, help us better understand the all-encompassing scope of religion and the importance of our personal lifestyle? 2. All true revivals and reformations are theocentric, centred in God, not anthropocentric, centred in human behaviour. How does the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector illustrate this principle? We read this parable in Luke chapter 18, verses 9 to 14. Also he spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous, and despised others. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And question 3. In class, discuss your answer to Thursday's final question. How can you know if you are ready, and can you have assurance without being presumptuous? And now for Inside Story, a mission story with Sibylla. Thank you, Sibylla.
Jesus versus the Dragon by Andrew McChesney. Something strange happened to Q in northern Laos in late 2020. Her body, and especially her belly, started to swell. Her worried husband Cheng took her to the local shaman, who informed them that a dragon had impregnated Q and intended to take her away to an underwater world. You need to give animal sacrifices to appease the dragon and to call back Q's spirit, the shaman said solemnly. Cheng gave the shaman everything he demanded, but Q got worse. Cheng turned to traditional healers for treatments over the next 2 months, but nothing helped. He spent everything on shamans and traditional healers, but Q's health continued to deteriorate. Finally, Cheng thought about asking a Christian pastor to pray for Q. 2 Seventh-day Adventist leaders happened to be visiting Q's village at the time, and after praying for her, decided to send her to a hospital in Laos capital, Vientiane. At the hospital, the physician diagnosed Q with nephrotic syndrome, a kidney disorder whose symptoms include swelling linked to excess fluid retention. But after a week in the hospital, Q sank into a coma and was placed on life support. She was transferred to the intensive care unit, where the doctor gave her a 50-50 chance of survival. He asked who would pay the high medical bills to keep her under his care. Cheng spoke with his relatives, but they did not have the money. The Adventist leaders who brought Q to the capital and paid her initial hospital bills also lacked funds. Faced with high bills and no assurance Q would recover, Cheng made the difficult decision to remove her from life support and bring her home. It was painful to send her back home to die, but there was nothing we could do for her, a church leader said later. The only hope left was that God would show mercy and perform a miracle for her. Days after returning home, Cheng called the Adventist district pastor to ask him to pray for Q in their home. The pastor, who arrived with several Bible workers, lived far away. He decided to stay for a few days so he could also assist with the funeral. As the family waited for Q to die, the pastor and Bible workers fasted and prayed daily. Instead of dying, Q improved. She began to breathe easily on her own, and the swelling subsided. By May 2021, she was walking without help. Today, Q is a living testimony to the people of northern Laos that there is a God in heaven.
This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.